Something I think the internet often robs us of is seeing the actual timeline of things that are going on. Not just how long it takes to actually make a mug compared to a 90-second reel, but how long everything takes. How long your favorite maker sits with an idea, plays with it, changes it again, before you've ever seen the start of it. How long someone might be discussing an opportunity with a potential business partner before all of a sudden there's a big announcement and you're left feeling in awe, or worse, behind, while you're watching someone else, quote unquote, succeed. As we scroll along, it can look like everyone is out there catching amazing opportunities, getting recognition, writing books, selling out of shop updates, and basically winning at this whole making a living from the things we make thing. But that's the internet's timeline. The internet that never sleeps and definitely rarely, if ever, stops. And on today's episode, as I sat down with Stanley Tong, I'm gratefully reminded that the internet's timeline and reality are two very different things. I reached out to chat with Stanley after seeing his Thoughts and Prayers series, a powerful body of work creating strong visuals on the effects of a bullet striking a form. A series he actually made more than a year ago. And yet, only recently, and quite suddenly, has gotten a lot of recognition on the internet. We talk about how the series came about and what's happened in the year since, as well as the time he's taking to figure out the next steps instead of letting the internet push him into a constant state of urgency. Not to mention the decision to use a platform to express a message and what may or may not happen if that message changes. In other words, do you keep making the work you know people want, or do you change? We talk about all of this and so much more, which we'll get into right after a brief word from our sponsor. Our sponsor, who is actually you, my fellow maker friend. The Maker's Playbook quite literally would not exist without you. Whether you've left a review on whatever app you're currently using to listen, given us a shout out on social media, taken a photography course with me directly, or joined the community. I could not keep doing this without your support. Both the emotional support and, pragmatically, the financial support. While I will work to keep as many resources as free as possible, there are, naturally, still costs associated with creating free content. If you've enjoyed this podcast or found even just one of my free monthly photo tips helpful, please consider visiting makersplaybook.com/podcast-support and making a small contribution. Thank you so much in advance. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikes Kara. Hey, Stanley, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's always such an awkward transition that nobody knows about when we're talking like normal humans, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, right, I have to start this somehow.
That's okay. We're making it work.
Indeed. Well, before we get into it, I'm just going to right away have you introduce yourself to however you introduce yourself in the realm of ceramics, I suppose, or I don't know, take it whichever way you want.
Sure. So my name's Stanley Tong. I am a ceramic artist. I've been practicing for about 3.5, 4 years now. I do ceramics as like a second career. For the day job, I'm an engineer. And right now I'm in grad school. So that's my full-time thing. But yes, love ceramics, love seeing the different ways that people interact with clay. And I'm really passionate about just making spaces for other people to find their creativity.
Did you go straight into grad school? I'm just connecting the assumptions of like, did you get into ceramics in undergrad and then that kind of has continued?
Sure. So I graduated. So I'm an engineer. I graduated back in 2018. I've been working for about 5 years in engineering. And then now I'm in grad school. So all of my formal education is completely unrelated to art. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of a self-taught artist from that standpoint.
I mean, I think it's wise to have multiple multiple wells of knowledge to draw upon.
Valid, yeah.
And I'm going to make the assumption, but this is definitely a question that I mentioned to you before we hit record. Our community members submit questions, but there's the assumption that we're all working with, that your knowledge as an engineer presumably has come seriously into play with the body of work that you've got right now that is getting a lot of traction, called Thoughts and Prayers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a mechanical engineer for reference. So we do study material science, and physics is a big part of that. My Thoughts and Prayers series was definitely a series that was informed from, my baseline understanding of physics from engineering. But I also used to watch Mythbusters all the time as a kid, watching them shoot ballistics clay. There was this other show I used to watch back on the History Channel where they had this, they would shoot like blocks of clay with these World War II weapons to, show people all this stuff. And as a nerdy kid and as a current nerd, I love that stuff. So that was part of the inspiration behind the series, and as well as just kind of understanding like what happens when a bullet hits something. Where does the energy go? What does the material going to interact like? For clay specifically, that definitely informed some of that and has informed other pieces I've worked on as well.
I mean, I'm obviously biased towards clay, but I think it's such an interesting medium in the way that it can capture movement. You get that. I'm talking with my hands, and we were just talking about how it's an audio-only podcast. It's very not helpful for people,
okay.
Particularly the exit trajectory, I suppose, or a lot of different things. But because clay has this special quality that it's both malleable and can also kind of be frozen in an instant, if you will, if you don't touch it after you shoot it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
I think it's a great way of describing it, right? It's like the clay itself is malleable enough such that it captures the energy of the impact, but also it holds it and freezes that impact in time. And that was one thing that I really loved about this series, is the ability where you can actually see kind of what that peak of damage looks like, right? Typically when a bullet hits something like ballistics gel, you'll see it expand and then contract again. But what we're getting is that peak of expansion because clay doesn't contract. So I think it's a really cool visual demonstration of what that looks like, right? It's almost explaining the destruction through sculpture is kind of like the artsy way of saying it, right? But I love it.
I'm cracking up because I love that there's an engineering way to explain it. So I think you said the peak of I've already forgotten the exact, not the peak of the moment, because I'm thinking now in photography terms.
Okay.
We can talk about the exact same moment in time, and yet it is hilarious that there's a certain type of phrasing that's like, I can see it in vinyl lettering on a museum wall.
Okay. All right. We're manifesting. I love it.
It's really interesting to me too to think about it in terms of comparison to photography, right? And my background, because what got me really passionate about photography in particular was that frozen in time moment, right? That leap across a puddle and the person is in the air.
Yeah, it's like it's capturing that peak of expansion is how I would describe it,
yes,
right? Just before whatever other material would contract.
Yep. Yeah. So for when you're speaking to engineers, it's the peak of expansion. When you're speaking to artists and clay people, it's the malleability of the medium. And then
right. Yeah.
This is hilarious.
Putting on different hats. Yeah.
They're not quite touching. They're right over the rain puddle, so it's that frozen moment. And yet you take that same concept and you put it into a 3-dimensional state when it comes to your pots, which is just like, oh, this is a completely different situation. Right.
Right.
Well, I've gone straight to present day. So let's back ourselves up a little bit and kind of explain how you got here, and also kind of how you're balancing all of this, because are you doing more engineering for grad school, or what's the specialty?
Yeah, I'm in business school actually right now. So I'm getting my MBA.
Naturally, of course. That all of this makes sense.
Right. We're making it work, right?
Well, so tell us a little bit about how, either however far back we want to go, like how you originally got into clay and kind of how you see this intersecting for yourself with all the things that you're into.
Yeah. So for me, the first time I think I ever touched clay was in high school. We had like a hand building class, right, for ceramics, and that was fun. But I always wanted to try throwing. So flash forward many years after college, after working for a couple of years during COVID, I was looking for something to do with my mom. And, I just found this show. It was a great show, by the way, if you haven't seen it. It's called The Great Pottery Throwdown. It's on. Yes. Okay. I'm nodding. Yeah.
Yes.
Great show.
Yes.
Super wholesome. Big fan.
We love the BBC. They have all the best shows.
Amazing. So I was watching this show recommended to me by a friend, and my mom and I were looking for stuff to do, COVID, bored. So yeah, we decided, hey, there's a pottery studio nearby. Why don't we try it? So my mom and I take a class together. We're having fun. I take another class with my brother. And then, so that was, I think, May of 21 or something like that.
Okay.
Then a few years later, 6 months later, I moved to Michigan for my job. I ended up moving for a job, moving to a whole other state, didn't know anybody there. So pottery kind of became my like third place, right? It's the place where I met new people, place where I spent a lot of time. It's a place where I found a lot of community. So I just really, really put a lot of time into it. And it was a huge part of like my growth as a person too. I think just engineering is such a rigid form. It's such a rigid practice, right? So kind of that ambiguity, that inherent ambiguity when you're given a lump of clay and saying like, hey, make whatever you want. Something that, I found myself exploring more and more with clay. And so I really enjoyed it. And then, yeah, a couple artist residency programs. I had one with a local studio, which was really great. And I also had one with the Graduate Hotels and DJ White Shadow, which called the Sweet Dream Society, which was awesome, by the way. It's great to have him as a mentor and meet other artists across the country. That was actually the residency that this Thoughts and Prayers set was born out of. And then about a year later, here we are, grad school.
I was just going to say, what's the timeline between when you took that class with your mom and when that residency started?
That was about 3 years.
In between the two?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was May, I think that was 2021. And then, yeah, July or May 23, I think was when that program started. Yeah.
Okay, so about 2 years apart. Because I'm listening to this going like, it's a very fast trajectory to jump from one to the next.
Okay. Yeah, it might have been 3 years. I don't remember. All the time just kind of blurs together. It was either 2020 or 2021 where I began ceramics, but yes.
Where did you move? Where were you in before Michigan then?
Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth area.
Gotcha. I'm going to now have to put you in touch with Nicole Bernard because she's a potter down in Dallas. There's a whole thing. But she was on the podcast just a little bit ago. I was only kind of trying to figure out timeline-wise just because, I think also there's so many of us that start out at a community studio, love that feeling, but it becomes, like you said, that third space of the amazing social connections, the amazing, just like so many of us describe it as therapy. And it doesn't necessarily latch into, I'm going to go apply for a residency to get really deep into an idea or this is all meant in pure compliment of like, whether or not I don't know that there was foresight per se, you can fill in the gaps here, but just from one jump to the next, I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
It's certainly, thank you. It's certainly this interesting way to look at it because, I just started this for fun with my mom, right? Totally random. And then this residency, I just saw an ad on Instagram. I applied on the last day and then it ended up being this incredible experience. I don't have like a formal art background. I don't have like an education in art. So to me, honestly, I didn't even know what a residency was until maybe 6 months before that when I had my first one at a local studio in Clawson, the Clawson Clay Guild, Clawson, Michigan. So yeah, it's just been like a big experience of, hey, I don't really know what this is, but we're just going to try it. And it's been great. So yeah, it's we're learning all these different things at the same time and just making the best out of it.
Has that been like a mentality for you in general or like, I don't know, a comfort zone kind of thing of just like, I don't know, but I'm going to try it and go for it? Because I think that's a unique trait, I feel like.
Oh, okay. I think for me, it came, I think so. Yes. I think there have been a couple of things that I've just kind of YOLO'd, honestly, just to put it very casually. And then just seeing where it goes. Like, for example, grad school was one of those things. I wasn't even planning to go I was considering grad school options and my manager at the time in Michigan, I worked at General Motors. So I had a manager who was really awesome. Shout out Ali. And he encouraged me to apply. I was like, I was on the fence. He's like, you just try it, just apply. And then I applied and that was like, I don't know, like 9 months ago or something, or maybe not even. And here we are in grad school right now. So yeah, now I live in a completely different state, all just because of a conversation. So yeah, I think in terms of just kind of trying things, I think I have a higher propensity to just see what happens. And I think that's worked out fairly well.
That makes sense because I think part of the trajectory I was talking about to go from like community clay to kind of serious body of work, if you will. Had we not had this conversation, and this is part of why I love this podcast, is if I'm scrolling your Instagram and I see this collection of work and this title that is also like so poignant, I presume, oh, you have a BFA, you have academic, because it's using art to make a point about a social statement. And I was going to say a moment in time, but that doesn't really feel accurate anymore, considering, I was in the 6th grade, 7th grade when Columbine happened, and
Right.
I'm 38. So what is that? Almost 30 years ago? I'm not doing the math correctly. We're over a couple decades, right? So it's not a moment in time anymore.
Right.
In so many ways. And so the default is to assume a person making that kind of body work, my default, I should say, is like that comes out of the very kind of academic approach to art, right?
Interesting. Okay.
For me, from my personal,
totally.
experience, like art school was kind of the non-functional, the like, you have to say something, it has to have meaning, it has to have all of this like weighty stuff, instead of making something because you like it, which is what I experienced in a community studio. So I was like, this jump from headspace, I guess, is what I was also thinking about. I don't know.
That's interesting. I mean,
that's just all my stuff put onto you, though.
No, I think that's cool. I mean, because honestly, most of the work I had made prior, I was just making stuff because I liked it, right? And so this was my first time ever really putting a message behind my work. And I think that even pieces I've made afterwards have just been random. Like, I just like making things as they look cool for the most part, right? But this one series was the series that had the most meaning, right? Had the most, actually had a message. It wasn't just sculpting because it's cool. I mean, there are things where I'll pull from like my heritage, or I'll pull from, Chinese calligraphy for a way I decorate something, right? But in terms of the weight, the impact of the body of work, this was the first one. And it's cool to hear you say that, because I take that as a compliment. That's great. It was another one of those like weird things where it was also very much a, hey, let's just try and see what happens. The summer, for context, the residency was 3 months, and working with clay, how long it can take to get all these things made, right? So in making this set, I had to borrow and have so much help from some fantastic friends. So I have a friend with kiln who did all the firing for me. I had a friend who lent me a property to shoot things, guns and ammo to shoot all this stuff, because I live in an apartment. Where am I going to do that, right?
And this was one of the questions.
Okay, yes, yeah, everything, yes. Very valid. We can circle back to that. But I also had a friend lend me his backyard to pit fire, and I had never pit fired before too either. So originally, I used to do project management. So I'm very much type A, hey, this timeline, etc. But what we realized is there's not enough timeline to test this. So I just made 15 bases and hope for the best, drive up, and then we just shoot them and see what happens, right? Certainly a large amount of risk with that, as well as pit firing. We did have one test pit firing, which was good. And a lot of those pieces broke. So we figured out the hard way. Let's do something the other. Let's not break these pieces. The test pieces break, and let's do the right ones the real way, or the real ones the right way, right? But yeah, This was another one, like, we don't have enough time to test it. Let's just see what happens. And it seemed to work out well.
That's hilarious. I just totally lost my train of thought, actually, with what I was going to say. So I'm going to pull up that question that I mentioned, because this was getting more specifically, I alluded to Bill's question earlier, but getting specific, he was asking what benefits and challenges come about by using an engineering approach to ceramics. If that's kind of how he was seeing your journey with this. Maybe that's not what it is, but
sure.
Yeah, this is the fascinating thing, right? Outsider looking in.
Yeah, I think in a few different ways it informs my art. So the first one being specifically as it relates to the Thoughts and Prayers series, understanding what level of moisture the clay needs to have to absorb the energy without either shattering or slumping. That was really important here. Ceramics, I think one of the most important fundamentals is moisture control, and having an understanding of like how ceramic as a material before it's fired retains that moisture, loses moisture, and regains moisture was fundamental, right? So the way I rehydrated the pots, the level of moisture that it kept in the pieces, as well as just generally working with clay. A lot of people say you can't save a bone dry piece if it's cracked, but like with my understanding of how the material reabsorbs moisture and all this stuff, I've been able to save many broken bone dry pieces and, adjust things, right? So having an engineering background has helped in the sense of A, with that set, B, also with the ability to work with the clay with a deeper understanding of moisture control, which I feel is one of the most important characteristics when you're working with this material. But also, for context, I was an engineer who specialized in industrial 3D printing. So I've actually invented things that I use for pottery like tools. So I'll make my own tools. I wish I brought one with me, but essentially I designed this rack that helps me dry pieces uniformly. So like, for example, let's say this water bottle is a piece, when you put it on a board, right? You're waiting for it to dry for trimming. This top might get dry, but the bottom like still stays super wet. So I designed something that you can only manufacture with 3D printing. It's called Design for Additive Manufacturing. It's like a super nerd thing that I used to do all the time, and I still do. But it allows you to make sure this piece dries evenly throughout the entire piece. So there are things I'll do there where my engineering experience will inform the tools that I create for pottery as well. They really are more intertwined than I would have expected. And also hand building too. So designing structures and all that stuff.
I mean, I feel like of any of the mediums out there, ceramics is the most sciencey of all of the arts. Maybe that's the sweeping statement to say because I've never done metalsmithing or I've never done glass blowing. There's so many other things also that have a lot of intensity when it comes to physics and fire and all sorts of stuff. But, I don't know that you're going to radically change how you can stretch canvas over wood.
Okay, yeah, that's
more knowledge of, I'm thinking of other mediums where it would have as dramatic of an impact as it can have on something like ceramics, because there's just so many layers, right? There's getting good at making the piece in the first place, and there's getting good at the moisture control, as you said, and then the chemistry of glazes and firing. Like, it's just endless.
It's a whole, and every one of those things you mentioned is a rabbit hole in itself. Like glazing is magic to me, right? So it's nuts.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit of how you, and we're not going to only talk about the Thoughts and Prayer series, but it is so powerful, and I don't want to pigeonhole you into this series.
Sure, yeah.
But tell us a little bit, if you can, kind of that progression of going from making things that you loved. Like, was it within just the conversations you were having in the residency, or was the goal of the residency to create a singular body of work, or what that kind of trajectory looked like? I keep using the word trajectory, which is ironic because we're talking about gun.
Okay. Yeah, no pun intended, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to intend it now so that it doesn't sound dumb when I use it 5 more times.
No, pun intended. I like it. So yeah, the residency was very much an open-ended opportunity. I asked the same question, like, do you have any things that we're supposed to be making? They said, no, we're just going to sponsor you to make whatever you want to make. They gave us a private studio in the hotel. So for example, Graduate Hotels is one of the sponsors for this program. They're like a boutique hotel chain. And I was the one artist in Michigan. There were 9 of us across the country. So I was working in the Ann Arbor Graduate Hotel. So in a hotel, there's like a room they converted to an art studio, which is super dope. So yeah, I was just working in there. And
by yourself. So it wasn't like a residency with people around you.
No, because we were all spread all over the country. So there was one in Rhode Island, there was one in California, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it was all spread out all over the country, and we would meet on Zoom and stuff, which was really fun. In terms of creating the pieces, I created 3 bodies of work that summer. The first one was a set of lamps that I hand built, really highlighting texture and reflected lighting. The second one was a series of vases that I sculpted to look like they were draped with cloth. So again, this was another one that's kind of informed with my engineering mindset. We can get into that in a bit. And then the third one was the Thoughts and Prayers series. The reason that I chose to make the Thoughts and Prayers series was originally I was going to make just lamps and, the sculpted cloth. But there was a shooting that happened very closely to the time that this residency began back in May of 23 in Allen, Texas. And for reference, I lived in Dallas, Fort Worth for a good portion of time, which is where Allen, Texas is. Like I'm fairly certain I've been to the mall where it happened before. So I felt this is my first time with a platform, because the residency offers a show at the end. They help you host a solo show, which is awesome. I never had a platform before, never had a show. And I figured if I have one, I should use it to send a message. So that was kind of the impetus for wanting to do something a little different with my work.
That's amazing. And also just to have the moment of reflection to say, hold on a second, this is going to get more eyes on it than my average vase, lamp, whatever.
Totally,
How can I do that? That says something a lot about you as a human, I think, in the most positive of ways, right? Because especially now, I think we get so wrapped up in reach, in internet reach, and in getting, I don't know, likes, followers, all of that kind of stuff, that you can try to make. A lot of times, I think I talk with a lot of artists who are trying to make the most palatable stuff
Oh,
so that
yeah.
they can sell it, so that they can quit their job and can become full-time artists. And I totally understand that desire and that dream and the draw to do that. But then, does that sustain? This is going to sound really woo, but the word that came to mind was, does that sustain the soul over the long run, right?
Valid.
I was just thinking, me saying that is also absolutely no judgment of anyone, because I'm also in the house that makes 24-ounce giant mugs that rank number 1 on Etsy, because that's what pays the bills. So like there's balance. There's not one or the other, but yeah, it's just a fascinating transition for me to think of how, when you said like, this is the first body of work you've ever done like that, I was like, wait, I want to understand.
Yeah, I think that's to me what makes art such a difficult business, right? I think that's inherently one of the challenges, because you have this idea of commoditization of your work, and then on the other side, you have the concept of what you want to create as an artist, right? So oftentimes the demands of the market are typically more commodity type works, right? Like mugs sell really well. I mean, there's a reason that, that's what you see a lot of the times at farmers markets and a lot of the other items that, and I don't mean commoditization in a negative connotation, but in terms of the amount of people who are interested in purchasing it, right? Like your target demographic is very wide for something like that, as opposed
especially
to,
if it's something funny, like a butt mug.
Yeah, exactly.
Sells for days.
Yep. Oh, totally. There's things like that I think that pay the bills, right? Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of that coin, you might have something that you really want to explore, but in terms of who's interested in purchasing that slice of the pie is a lot smaller. So it's walking a line, and that's what I think is what makes art such a difficult thing to sustain business on, honestly.
Do you feel like, and I just want to make sure I'm not making any assumptions here.
Sure.
Do you feel like that's why it's important for you to have kind of these varying I mean, I also think you're just genuinely interested in multiple things, probably like myself. But with seeing this Thoughts and Prayers series get as much traction as it has it put any kind of like, oh, I want to go do this now? Or is it more like, this is still going to be the passion side thing, and we'll finish this MBA and get a very safe retirement package from GM?
Yeah. Well, I think that for me, I like to have optionality, right? And that's a very MBA word that I've learned here at my time in business school. I certainly think, I mean, it's weird because I had created the set about a year ago, right? And then now it's popular like a year later. And it's at the same time when I'm moving to another place, starting a new thing, meeting all these people. It's been a very overwhelming experience in and of itself. And then we have all this at the same time. So I think it's given me a lot of I've reflected a lot on it. If I could do something creative, like I think that's a question that we, meeting people here, we talk a lot about. Like if you were paid $1 million a year to do whatever you want, like what would you do, right? And for me, I think I'd like to create things. I'd like to create things that still kind of, work a little bit engineering, still on the art side. And if I could do that and, it paid the bills, that'd be great. But in terms of what I see myself realistically doing to pay the bills for the coming years, it will probably still be a W-2 job somewhere, doing something cool, hopefully. But if there is an opportunity for my art to snowball and become more of a sustainable practice, then by all means, that'd be great to lean into.
I mean, to be clear, mechanical engineering and 3D mastery is absolutely creating things. I mean,
that's true. That's fair too. Yeah,
whole nother ball of wax. And I feel like if you don't know them already, there are 2 artists I keep thinking about in this entire conversation that I will gladly introduce you to, that you probably already know them, being Kurt Hammerly and Kenny Song from Turn Studios.
I do know Hammerly Studios. Yes, the work is insane.
I was like, I think there's definitely a path of merging engineering knowledge and quote unquote art. Like, yeah, it's there.
Yeah,
it's there,
totally. But I mean, seeing what Hammerly's Studios is putting out, or Hammerly Ceramics is putting out, is absolutely crazy. I mean, trying to wrap my head around how you even come up with a process like that to make molds at that level of complexity it's just wild. So it's very impressive.
But I totally digress and didn't mean to put you on the spot of like, what's your 5-year plan? Like we're
okay.
prepping you for post-business school job interviews or something.
I mean, totally. I'm getting ready for that right now. Recruiting's coming up, so I don't mind practice.
Oh boy. Well, to kind of wrap up this particular body of work, I'll
Mhm.
ask a couple of other questions our community members had, and then we'll just keep kind of diving into the broader
Sure.
conversation. But
Mhm.
we do have a number of teachers in the community. And so I just
Mm.
want to kind of summarize their deep appreciation of you giving such a strong visual platform and tackling what is a very real issue that
Mm.
they think about every single day they walk into work. So just wanted you to know that from a particular group of people. But Jenna, who is also a teacher, specifically asked how you deal with what we assume is probably a fair amount of trolling on the internet because
Sure.
of the subject matter.
Well, this body of work has been exposed to, I think, probably close to 3 million views at this point, combined TikTok and Instagram. So I think when you take anything and you expose it to a large volume of people, you do get a bell curve of interactions, right? I'd say by and large, most of the interactions have been very positive, right? I personally don't really like being in the spotlight. I'm kind of an introvert. So to have all of these like comments and sometimes with DMs and emails, etc., it's all by and large fantastic, right? This level of support has been incredible. Of course, being a bell curve of interactions, you do get some on the other end too. But I mean, I think I focus on the ones that are relevant to me, and then the other ones just let them go by, right? I think that's just life in general.
Assume they're a robot.
I mean, I think people interact and they interpret art in different ways. I think that's kind of also the beauty and also the challenge of art, right? It's a double-edged sword, right? You might make something, some people love it, some people hate it, and that's okay, right? That level of interpretation is always something that I think as artists that you have to expect to some degree. So for me, I oftentimes when there's a lot of comments and I'll read all of them. I think that most of the time, a lot of people will make assumptions about the body of work or about the messaging behind the body of the work. And a lot of those times, those assumptions are incorrect. And those will lead to sometimes people have more emotional responses, whether those are positive or negative. And yeah, it's just, think about the assumptions you're making, think about what interactions you might be having. Yeah, it's interesting. But overall, very positive interactions.
I would almost argue, and I don't know if this is going to be a hot take or not, but I almost think creating something that people are either going to love or hate, and not necessarily only in the realm of a body of work that is about, a current social issue or a pandemic in many ways, but in general, like aesthetically, polka dots. Let's just take like the most mundane thing.
Okay. All right. Polka dots. Very hot
But
topic.
picking something, like as artists, I feel like the goal ultimately, and frankly, this is just good business, is to have an opinion. And then by opinion, I also mean aesthetic, design choice, anything that is in some ways polarizing, right? Because it's impossible to please everybody. And so the goal is, at least in my opinion, to make something that people are either going to love or they're going to hate, because then you get people self-selecting and you get that, who's the person, is it Seth Godin who said like you need 1,000 true fans? The phrase 1,000 true fans, people can Google and tell me who should be accredited for the quote.
Sure, you're right, yeah.
But the idea is the number of people you need who love what you do and are passionate about what you do in order to effectively have kind of a viable business is a lot smaller than what, social media follower counts make it seem. Because if you were to have 1,000 true fans, is this notion of like people who are that polarizing, they absolutely love what you do. Well, they're going to go out and then tell people about it and then the idea is you're attracting only people who actually like what you're doing. And the people who don't fall by the wayside, and that's fine because you don't need everyone. It's also impossible to make something that everybody likes. I mean, that's like I don't know, a coloring book?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe people out there hate coloring books.
To be fair, as soon as the words came out of my mouth, the one and only high school art teacher I had never allowed her grandchildren to have coloring books because she said plain paper was better.
Go. She's in that 1%.
Plain paper is your imagination, right? Like, so here I tried to pick something mundane and it's actually coloring books, totally polarizing.
Yeah, it's a very hot topic right now in the art world, coloring books.
Oh, shoot. I just my brain went down a totally weird rabbit hole on that. Like when it got popular for like adult coloring books, and then I thought about the phrase adult coloring books, and that sounds weird. If it's whatever.
Sure.
I'm gonna ask a different question. The other thing that came to mind as soon as you started talking about the sheer number of eyeballs on your work now is I'm assuming that can be overwhelming. I mean, that sounds like a full-time job, just keeping up with your comments and inbox if you're reading every single one. I mean, what is that like?
Yeah, it certainly has been a lot. I had never had this much attention on anything I had done before. So for me, this was a new experience and another part of that learning curve. It has been a lot, right? Like sometimes I think the first day that I posted my video, I went to the movies with my friends the day after actually. And then I remember the night I was really tired of the movies because I posted my thing. I'm like 11 p.m. I barely used TikTok for reference at that point in time. And I was like, oh, I'll just post this video on here, whatever. And then I'll try to go to bed. And then, I don't know, like an hour later, I look at my phone and I was like, there's like 1,000 notifications on this thing. I was like, what's going on? And then subsequently I stayed up until 3 a.m. just watching like all the things go. And then Instagram also started to, get some traction. And then that was a lot, right? So I use Instagram more than I use TikTok, and my art account is, what I look at. So yeah, it was a lot. So yeah, I do try to keep up, but the volume is quite high. So those interactions have been a lot to manage.
I mean, I'm just also thinking of the demands of being in grad school. Like, that's not exactly you're in your first job out of engineering school and you're sitting at a desk and the work you're getting is not exactly challenging. So you have time to answer some comments every once in a while. Like, that's a completely different stage of life to get this much attention than trying to finish a master's.
Yeah. It's very funny because I just started my master's in August. So like 2 months ago. And then my Instagram video started getting really like the ball started rolling in like July. So 1 month prior to moving to Boston, everything starts over. I have new social circles, new habits. I'm living in a dorm now. My day-to-day, the workload for school is quite intense. I was talking about this to someone earlier today. It's just been a lot more than I think any of us expected. So yeah, it's been tough managing everything. And then honestly, I think one part of that is as much as I'd love to have taken advantage of this social media momentum, I didn't have any time, right? Because, for me, my calendar is like triple booked constantly throughout the entire day. And it's only going to get worse as recruiting picks up here in a bit. But yeah, I mean, schoolwork takes basically from 8 or 9 a.m. until like midnight every single day. And then there's no time for anything else. You have clubs and all these other things. And then on top of that, trying to manage this
constant buzzing in your pocket.
Yeah, exactly. This constant buzzing and trying to capitalize on it in the best way possible. But I don't exactly have a strategy to do it. So maybe the way I'm doing it is not efficient, nor is it effective, right? For either, time versus upside. So that is another aspect I'm trying to figure out. I think there are professors here who specialize in marketing. I'm taking a marketing class right now, so I'm trying to think about all the different ways. For example, the program I'm in is all case study based. So you have to read case studies and then you have to talk about them. So when I'm reading these cases about how companies have done their marketing, I'm trying to figure out, okay, are there any strategies here that actually are relevant to me? Are there professors here I could talk to, which, I need to be taking advantage of? Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot balancing everything. And it's all the timing is nuts.
I'm laughing so hard and nobody can see that because we did not talk before this interview, like, verbally.
Right.
We DM'd, we emailed.
Sure.
But I had no idea how alike, when you said you used to be a project manager, and I was like, oh, our brains probably work very similarly. And now as you're talking about this, I was like, this is precisely where I was actually thinking about this question, because that is absolutely how my brain works. Because also I feel like I don't know, maybe it's created on social media, that sense of urgency of like, oh my gosh, this is happening, so I have to do something with it instead of just like letting it be the thing that it is. I don't know, but it made me feel totally more normal when you were like, yes, this is going through my head in marketing classes. I was like, okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I like what you said about social media creating this sense of urgency, right? I think when my video got really popular, my friends like, oh my God, you have to make a video the next day. And I was like, okay. And then so I did. But this was at the same time I was moving out of my apartment. So I had all my stuff was going to get shipped out in like, I don't know, like a week or something. So I was like, half of my room is packed up. I'm in my garage making another video. I think half of these videos I filmed are on top of moving boxes. Like you can't tell, but my piece, I'm not using a table. I'm using moving boxes and like a piece of cloth. So I'm literally in the process of moving, out of a townhome, shipping all my stuff in a pod to another state, getting all my, you have to take a pre-coursework too. So taking all of that, and there's like a billion things happening. That sense of urgency was kind of a pain point. There were some days where I'm like, okay, I need to just make something and put it out there. And then I tried my best to keep up with it. And then once I was here, moving back in and starting everything, I've certainly fallen off my my horse when it comes to keeping things consistent on social media, but we're working with what we got.
And I appreciate that though, because I feel like so many people talk about, and we talk about this a lot in the community of, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And it's like, but that's not the phase of life or business you're in right now. You're in
True.
the MBA phase. Like,
That's true. I guess so. Yeah. That's how we define it.
Unless the traction was so huge that you were like, actually, I'm going to defer my acceptance for a year and we're going to see where this goes or something. Like,
Right.
okay, then yeah, make sure you're posting every day because that's bananas. But
Yeah.
has it like changed? This is a weird question maybe, but has
No,
it changed meeting new people since you were talking about like having to create this new social circle?
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly has. I think, I'm immersed in this crowd of like 900 new people that I will be, with for the next 2 years. My section, which is how they divide 900 people up into group, like approximately 10% each. So I section of like 90-ish people, like shout out section G. You meeting all of them for the first time was great too. And like learning about what other people are doing. And I found out one of my section mates is an incredible rapper, which is so cool, by the way. His name's King Soul on Spotify. Shout out, Ben. Yeah, but like meeting all these people, learning about them, and then like sharing, what I do and what they do. It's always cool to see how people are always working on something on the side. Usually, or people have these cool talents, and then they've also been really receptive and supportive of what I do too. I actually brought a piece into the classroom to show them, and they were all super awesome and interested in it. And I don't know, I was showing it, like I was facing one group, and I turned around and like everyone else was behind me too. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know there were this many people still here. So yeah, I don't know. It's great. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been a great way to bond with people too. I think a lot of people in my section and in the class are interested in art too. We have a couple of the artists in the section. So I just joined the art club here too, and going to try to get some things set up where maybe I can teach people a little bit of pottery basics. And I know a lot of people are interested in trying it. Like I have a wheel, I just don't have the space. So let's try to figure something out and get other people into the creative space, and maybe they can start doing art as well. It's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's going to be really interesting to see how it can intersect with, when I think of an MBA, a very kind of traditional approach to learning quote unquote business. Yeah, that's going to be really interesting. I personally have one other question before I get back to our community questions, selfishly cutting the line here.
Yeah.
You had mentioned earlier that the show and this entire body of work was actually done like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there was a reason that it all of a sudden kicked off, or, the algo robots do what the robots do, and who knows? Or can you, because I think a lot of people will be surprised by that, right? Because I think social media feels like I put all this work and effort into creating this post, and if it doesn't get traction in 24 hours, it was useless. And God, I hate this. And, whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
I think the pressures of social media and are they're challenging to deal with, right? I mean, I posted stuff about this series a long time ago. It had fairly normal traction with the people who followed me, but nothing compared to what happened in the past couple of months. So for me, I think what I realized is that the value of art is almost inherently tied to the way the story is told. So the difference between what I did back then and what I did recently was I told the story about why I made the piece, and a lot of people really loved that. So I would see comments about people saying, like, I loved hearing about the process. I loved hearing why you did this. The name is really interesting. Hearing about what you did with your auction, all these different things are not things I originally thought people were very interested in, but it was interesting to see how that's what people gravitated towards. And it almost ties back to my show last year when I met this woman who was interested in some of the pieces I had, and telling her the story about it really changed the way she looked at the pieces. And I could almost see it in her face, right? So I think being able to tell the story about what you're doing and why you're doing it makes all the difference in how people perceive what you put together.
Is there a reason you were retelling the story kind of a year later after the show? Like, did something spur that, or it was you were packing the pots up, or?
That's a great question. I don't know why I made that video, to be honest. I think, I think maybe it was because I was packing up the pots, or I felt like, I think at the time when I first made this series, I knew what I'd put together was going to be something that I felt was special to myself. And that's why I intentionally held on to some of the pieces. I did have an auction where I sold about half of the set and related to charity work, but I wanted to hold on to some of them. And I think I don't know why I did that, but I just knew that there was something special here. I didn't want to get rid of all my pieces. And I don't know, I filmed that video just like kind of randomly. I think the pieces were just sitting in my living room for like a year. And then, I don't know. I just wanted to tell the story, I guess, a little bit more. And I can't even remember why I made that video, honestly.
That's awesome, actually. I mean, I think it goes to show both of us. I was laughing about our brains working the same way in terms of the strategic thinking of, okay, what should I be doing? How can I do the backwards math on these case studies and whatever? Mm-hmm. And yet the thing I hear over and over again when I'm having these conversations is it's like the best successes or whatever the word success means, whatever, the best kind of whatever best stories were the completely unplanned. Like at a certain point, we have to let go of that strategy and just do what feels good or feels right or feels like the thing to do. And that comes across a lot more. I don't want to use the word authentic because it's so overused, but that's the only word coming to mind. It comes across. It tells that story in a very genuine way instead of like, oh, I learned about this case study in my marketing class, so now I'm going to try and apply these concepts to this body of work in order to go viral or whatever. Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you, right? I feel like I'm a very type A person. So to me, I always try to plan everything. But there are absolutely times when I feel like the things I don't plan work out better than the things I do plan. And I agree with you completely, right? There's a certain amount of overthinking and overstructuring you can do, analysis paralysis, et cetera, right? When you're so used to operating in a very structured type A environment. But there are absolutely times when you just have to like let go and just see where things go, or just try something and wing it. And I think that's really, really important, actually. It's just being able to say, I'm going to make something. It's not going to be perfect, but that's okay. I'm just going to run with what I got, and I think that's a big part of art as well, right? I mean, if you worked on a piece and you want it to be perfect, you would spend forever on it because, there's no way you could ever make anything that would be perfect in everyone's eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. At a certain point, we have to let it go and put it out in the world. Otherwise, nobody's going to see it. Like this conversation would have never happened because nobody would see it in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, before I get caught up, because I can just keep asking questions all the time. So I want to make sure that I catch everything that everybody else submitted. Esther asked if you have ever done any artist talks at schools specifically, like at middle schools or high schools, and thoughts on potentially how teachers might be able to introduce your work to students. Because obviously this subject does adversely, not adversely, also adversely, but outsized impact on schools, I suppose, in the U.S. specifically.
Right. Yeah, I haven't before. I have been reached out to about it, and the things have just kind of fallen through the cracks. But in terms of people introducing my work to their classrooms, I think I have had comments where people have said, I'm a teacher. I've shown this to my students. And I think it's really, I take it as a compliment, but also at the same time, I think, it's tragic that this is the reality that we live in, right? So I know that's a little off topic, but I would be open to something like that. I haven't done it before, but it's almost at the same time, it's tragic that this is something that's relevant to a school, right?
Yeah. People obviously can't see as you're talking and I'm looking at you on video and don't want to put words into your mouth, but what I visually see is it seems to feel like a responsibility. I mean, there's a weight there to like your name being associated now with such a heavy subject.
Oh, maybe? It's valid.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's something I've been thinking about too, right? It's the only body of work I've ever made that has had this weight to it. And I know to a certain degree, some of the people who follow my art now are going to be expecting more of this. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I've now moved to another state. All of the things and the resources that I used to create this are no longer with me. I'm still connected with people who helped me out with it, but it's far more difficult to create the exact same series or something similar again, which I would love to do it. It just might take a little bit more time. So I don't know. That's another thing I've been, thinking about too is, right, like if I start, you go down that path that we talked about earlier, it's right. You have people who follow you and they like a certain thing that you make. And in this specific case, if I kept making these pieces, I'm sure they would sell because I've had many people ask me to buy one, but I am more interested in placing them in a gallery or like an exhibit where people can connect with the message as opposed to selling them. And then, fewer people see them. So, I only have a handful of pieces right now and my constraints on making more pieces right now are very, very strict. So it's the other side of the coin, right? It's like, if I wanted to explore things that I wanted to make, if I'm not making pieces related to gun violence, are people still interested in what I'm making? Is that going to cause any lack of engagement? There's a whole thing about it, right? So,
I mean, that comes super full circle, right? On that whole, like talking about commodification of art and trying to make something that had a message instead of make something that was palatable or people liked or people could, to sell. That's like the most full circle. It's ironic that is kind of the secular, like, oh, now I'm known for this, so I can commodify it and sell it in order to sell a bunch of them, which would just be ironic in maybe the truest sense of the word.
Yeah, it's like, do I want to do that? Is that the right way to use this, attention? So yeah, it's a complicated subject, right? I'm still think about it every day, trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. And I mean, right now, I honestly don't even have any time to make art, nor do I have the space to, which is a bit unfortunate, but hoping that'll change soon. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's a challenging thing. It's almost like brand association, right? It's a tricky line to walk.
That's a really interesting kind of business aspect to put to it because, yeah, like being associated with the subject of gun violence now also is like, it's a heavy thing to have your name associated with too. So then what happens if the day comes where you're like, look, I want to make mugs with smiley faces on them because I've been talking about gun violence for the past year and I just want to feel happy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's challenging, right? I think to me, it's like there is a sense of responsibility to some degree, right? And that might be a little overstated, but if this is the platform in which I can make an impact, then I think I should. But at the same time, is that something I want to continue working with and continue doubling down on? Or does that limit what I could do in the future in terms of my art or, my career and other aspects? We're just going to have to see where things go. Yeah. We're winging it again.
I appreciate this so much, though, because I think a lot of us as artists, and maybe especially full-time artists who are trying to be as socially aware as possible and acutely aware of like so much pain in the world, and meanwhile creating beautiful things. And, I think I shouldn't even lump everybody together. For myself, this has always been a struggle, right? Of like, I think art can change the world. I know art, art often has been a commentary, much like your work, on society. And, long-term change is far more cultural driven as opposed to like, I don't know, legislatively driven. And so then there's this certain kind of, I don't know, guilt complex for me of like, I should be using these skills to say something with a capital S. And you have said something maybe, or you've made a body of work that is directly connected to a really heavy topic, but it's the same struggle of like, wait, so now am I stuck with this? And so it's, I don't know if relieving is the right word because we're both sitting here going like, what the hell do we do?
Right. Yeah.
It feels less alone. How about that?
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's a good way of looking at it, right? At least I feel like there are a lot of artists, I think, out there who make things that are more lighthearted, just what they like making. And I think that's awesome too. I don't think there's there's no like one size fits all, right? I think there's certainly times where you should make what you want to make. And then if you want to do something that's a little different, then power to you as well. I think there's certainly going to be times where I want to make things that I just think look cool, right? And I hope to me, I'm just going to continue making what I like making, and we'll just see what happens. And I think that's really all anyone can do.
You took the words out of my mouth. That's absolutely all any of us can do. And also, we need beautiful things too, because otherwise I think we'd all just be depressed.
It's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We can't be living in a little boring box with no color.
Right. Well, I do also want to speak to, I feel like I'm ruining a perfectly little like full circle moment there on that.
Okay, sure.
But from the engineering side,
Mhm.
before you got to Thoughts and Prayer series, those vases that look like cloth
Oh yeah.
are fantastic and I want one.
Thank you. Well,
They're wonderful. And the one other question that we did have from Rhiannon, one of our community members, was talking about her daughter, interestingly enough, wants to go into engineering. She's planning on
okay.
becoming an engineer.
All
And
right.
Rhiannon is a full-time artist. And so it's
Okay.
this fascinating thing at home she was talking about in terms of like, we don't understand how each other's brains work
Mm,
in a certain way. Those are my
uh,
words, not hers.
okay.
But
Okay.
she was just really interested in how the fact that you're intersecting these two things, because for their
Mhm.
experience, they're two separate things, right?
Mm,
Her daughter, as she describes them, loves the math and the rules, and
mhm.
Rhiannon loves no math and no rules. And so it's really inspiring for them to see how you're bringing these worlds together. So,
Okay. Thank you, Rian. I appreciate that. It is a little bit of two sides of the coin, right? I think engineering is typically quite rigorous, typically, does the square fit in the square hole and does the circle fit in the circle hole? Whereas art is completely on the opposite. It's like there is no shape and there is no hole. You make whatever you want. I think that there's oftentimes a little bit more intersection than you might think, right? So, I mean, mechanical engineering background. I've worked as an engineer for 5 years. I do enjoy the technical stuff, but at the same time, it's ironic because the pieces I make, none of them are functional. I hate making mugs, for example. This is like something I always say. Like the mugs, for whatever reason, I don't like anything functional. Like very few of my vases can even hold flowers. So, some of them can, but then a lot of them are, really, really tiny openings where you wouldn't be able to fit a flower in there anyways, or, they have the big gunshot wound in them. There's a number of reasons, right? But
slightly porous.
yeah, slightly porous, right? But by and large, most of the pieces I make are non-functional. So I think you can definitely do both, right? I honestly didn't even find ceramics until like 3, 4 years ago, right? So I had already been working as an engineer. I'd, gotten my degree for a while then at that point. And yeah, so I never really considered myself an artistic person until fairly recently. I was like a creative person, right? I wouldn't have called myself an art person because my drawing skills are terrible. Painting, if you asked me to paint you, you'd probably be offended with what I create at the end. Not intentionally, but I'm trying my best here. But certainly, I think that you can do both, right? I think one informs the other, and art isn't always what you might think. It doesn't always mean painting. It doesn't always mean drawing. I have made paintings that I don't paint things that look realistic. I just like 3D sculpture, so I'll add sculpture to a canvas, right? So there's a number of things you could do, and I think engineering and art inform each other in more ways than people might expect. And I think it's great to have engineering as a job and then do art on the side. And then certainly you can have both as a career at the same time too.
I love that because I think my experience is the word art carries so much weight,
Mm.
and somehow calling ourselves a creative opens the door to like everything,
Mm.
right? Marketing is creative,
Mhm.
engineering is creative,
Mhm.
sales, if done with integrity and ethics,
Yes.
are creative,
Yes.
or frankly, if done without integrity, are creative. But I only do the latter. And the business is creative in so many ways because
Totally.
you're creating something that didn't exist before it was made. And so I love the way you've talked about it has just brought these two worlds together instead of being a disparate thing,
Mm.
which it's funny because I feel like I'm still thinking of them as being a disparate thing because I'm trying to like make the case for them to be together.
Sure.
And meanwhile, it's like, yes, just talk about them as you have as together, and they're together instead of it
Yeah.
being like, come
I,
on, yes.
I mean, honestly, I think that being an artist has also helped me a lot as an engineer. To be fair, I have been very lucky in the role that I had, allowed me a lot of autonomy, right? So if, I was in a much more structured engineering role, I might not have had the same flexibility, but in the role I held most recently, I had a lot of flexibility. I would make up the projects that I work on. A lot of them came from a creative place, right? So I think that having that creativity is so important, especially in a technical field. Like I've gotten patents out of something that I just made up and then decided to work on, right? So again, that's another example of something that doesn't exist, but you're working on something new and that requires creativity. I mean, the whole aspect of a patent is it has to be novel. That's one of like the key phrases there. novelty, creativity do go hand in hand. So I think that, as much as engineering does inform my art in terms of how it builds, physics, material, etc., the art side of things, being able to navigate ambiguity, come up with new concepts, think through things in a new way has absolutely informed my engineering work as well. The two go together well. They balance, I think.
I think you're ready for these recruiting interviews. Like that
I hope
was
so.
that was solid.
Thank you. We're trying.
That's amazing. Well, is there something that we haven't touched upon that you kind of wish people knew? And maybe, to flip the entire conversation on its head, we talked a lot about thoughts and prayers, and maybe there's a bunch of stuff people don't know because you're getting so focused on this particular body of work. What do you wish people knew about Stanley Tong?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that question before. Well, let me think.
I feel accomplished now in this interview.
Out of all of the little introductions that I've done, the several hundred times I've shaken someone's hand and introduced myself, this has not been a question they've asked me. No, I think, by and large, what a lot of people see on the internet is, yes, it's the product of what I'm working on, but it's not possible without the support of my friends, my family. This entire Thoughts and Prayers series would not have been possible without the help of many people, right? If I didn't have the platform that DJ White Shadow or Paul Blair and, Graduate Hotels put together to do the residency in the first place, this series never would have been made. If I didn't have someone who helped me, lend the guns and the ammo and the property, like two great friends there helped me there. Another friend who helped me with pit firing, another friend who helped me with the actual kiln work. There's like my girlfriend's been super supportive through the whole time. She spent countless nights with me in my little studio until midnight working, great support from people I worked with as well. And my manager was super understanding. He's like, hey, I know you're busy. You just got promoted at the same time. So, do what you need to do to balance both. And then my family and friends, friends coming to my show. I had to transport these pieces. They're super delicate. So my friends and I just all got in the car. They were holding these pieces. We drove half an hour to my other friend's house where she has a kiln. And yeah, it's just like,
please tell me you took a video of that because I just want to.
I think I was too stressed to do so. Yeah.
Fair enough.
One of my friends was just sitting there. He had to hold the piece upside down for half an hour because the bottom was, had some bullet impacts. But yeah, it's the product. I think the term is it takes a village to get here. And I think it does. It truly does, right? I'm incredibly grateful for the support of my friends, family, to continue to be able to do stuff like this. It takes a lot of commitment and also a lot of support to not get burned out in doing so. I'd say what my answer is.
Absolutely. That's the thing I think the internet kind of robs us of is like not realizing how much had to come together to make it even possible to then have anything happen, and the different aspects that you maybe don't even have any control over that get somebody to be able to do something or have an opportunity or whatnot. And so I appreciate that because that's in some ways exactly why I started this podcast in the first place. So awesome. Well, for people who have not seen the impact of shooting a gun into a vase or engineering and clay coming together in one, where should we send them on the internet?
Yeah, so I have Instagram, Stanley Tong Ceramics, all one word, StanleyTongCerm ceramics. I'm trying to spell it in my head. I'm bad at spelling. Yeah, ceramics, all one word. It's also my TikTok handle, and I have a website, StanleyTongCeramics.com. So yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think.
Way to snag the same name everywhere, even though this wasn't a grand plan. That's a thing of beauty in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
I was
nice. I had some other ideas for websites. Originally, the only reason I had a website was to make like a portfolio for professional recruiting. This was before ceramics. So yeah, it's just happenstance.
That's awesome. As a person who has slight modifications in a number of places, because Rebecca Marie is not exactly the most unique name on the planet,
Fair.
I thoroughly appreciate it.
Yeah, I've gotten lucky in that sense. Yeah, my name was John Smith. I really would have struggled with that.
Yeah, or even, there's so many, but awesome. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation. I love the different questions from the community and the way that, the way this conversation flowed. My first time being on a podcast, excellent experience. So thank you very much for this.
We like to set the bar high.
Yeah, you've blown it out of the water. So, the next podcast, wherever it is, they've got big shoes to fill.
Fantastic. Send their sponsors my way.
I will. I got you.
During the time of year when many of us are probably seeing other makers online talk about late night hours in the studio to produce massive inventories or heaps of holiday markets weekend after weekend and sales, and more sales, I hope this conversation with Stanley has reminded you that sometimes these things just take time. That no matter how much effort we try to force into making something happen, opportunities come when they come. And believe me, for a type A control freak like myself, that is incredibly frustrating to say out loud. So maybe this is a reminder mostly for me, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that I'm not alone. If you aren't producing like a magical machine-like elf right now, it's okay. If you need a bit of time to figure out what the next step is for your own work, it's okay. If you're pursuing other work outside of what you make, perhaps even in order to protect that work that you make, it is okay. Stanley's work is impressive to me no matter if he does it full-time or if it fits in around the demands of a very intense graduate school schedule. Interesting, creative ideas don't always come to us on the same timeline as the always demanding retail shopping schedule. And if you've listened to even just one of my past solo episodes here on the podcast, you know I am all about helping us all figure out what version of small business making actually works specifically for the kind of life you want to have. Because let me tell you, trying to keep up with that retail shopping schedule is definitely a life choice as well as a business choice. As always, if you're looking for help sorting out what version of this making life is right for your own needs, there's nearly 100 other makers from all over the world having these very conversations inside of the community right now. On Mondays, our longtime member Yvonne, who's based in Austria, hosts a co-working session. So if you've transitioned from a community studio and now work alone and are missing those wonderful organic chats that happen while your hands are in clay, how they ebb and flow as fellow makers focus on what they're doing and then take a break, you're going to love co-working. And if you've never been a part of a community studio, you're going to love co-working. There's also another weekly co-working session happening on Saturday mornings, thanks to Jenna in Western Massachusetts as well. Not to mention our monthly book clubs, studio tours, and photo Q&A sessions, just to name a few. I haven't even gotten to my absolute favorite stuff yet, but this is already going on too long, so you're just going to have to come over to makersplaybook.com/community to find out more. It is truly my favorite place on the internet. In fact, this episode was made possible in part thanks to our community members. And thanks to you as well. Whether you've left a review on whatever app you're currently listening to, giving us a shout out on social media, or taking a photography course with me directly. Or yes, joined the community. The Maker's Playbook literally would not exist without your support. Both the crucial emotional support as well as the pragmatic financial support. While I will work to keep as many resources as free as possible, there are naturally costs associated with creating free content. If now isn't the right time to come join us inside of the community, but you would like to pragmatically help support this show, please consider visiting makersplaybook.com/podcast-support and making a small contribution of whatever you feel comfortable with. Thank you so much in advance. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfun, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.